I don't actually live in Dalston. I live in Tower Hamlets,
Yeah.
where I was removed when I was kicked out of the place called Clay's Lane to make way for the Olympics, same as Mike, the guy who's just been speaking. And but I'm coming along here because I'm just interested in what goes on when these so-called regeneration schemes get going. I mean, the Olympics is a case in point where all sorts of claims are made, many of which are simply untrue. Like, for example, when we were at Clay's Lane, they said that they would create 9,000 new homes on the Olympic site, which would compensate for the loss of our estate and the loss of another estate, housing for 1,000 people. And actually, the housing they're going to build for the Olympic Village is being built on a site where housing was going to be built anyway. So there's absolutely no housing gain at all. That's not to say there may not be some housing gain in the future, but in terms of the original claim of £9,000, 9,000 homes, the maximum they can claim is probably somewhere around about half that figure, because the housing on Stratford City is going to be built anyway, and they have to take into account the loss of housing at Clay's Lane and Park Village, which are the two estates which were demolished. So this is a straightforward lie. And of course, this went through all of the planning process. It went through the compulsory purchase process. No one paid any attention to this. We pointed this out to the inspector, and he said, well, it's debatable as to how much housing, what the gain or the loss will be. It's not debatable, it's just a matter of doing the sums. But he, in one place he just repeated the claim, 9,000 homes, and in the other case he said, well, it's debatable. So there was no examination of this particular claim. Loads of other aspects of the Olympics similarly. Like, for example, they're now claiming something in the region of 30,000 jobs from the Olympics. Well, actually, in the CPO inquiry, they said they were going to produce 6,000 net new jobs. That is, taking account of the loss of jobs from the businesses which were closed down. They reckon they were going to produce 6,000 new jobs. So where has this 24,000 other new jobs suddenly come from? And they are now talking about sort of 30,000 new homes. But the reality is that all the way down the Lee Valley, you can see blocks of flats being built, because this is an absolute developer's paradise. Canals, land which is former industrial sites, which they can buy at prices which they hope to make a very large profit out of. So those houses were going to be built anyway. So the idea of the Olympics is going to bring loads of housing to the Lee Valley is simply not true. It was going to be built whether or not the Olympics came. They're claiming also that this other mammoth development at the Stratford City shopping centre, Westfield's shopping centre, which is the twin of the shopping centre in Shepherd's Bush. The Olympics is claiming that this is another benefit for the Olympics, which is, again, absolute rubbish. The Westfield site was going to be built whether the Olympics came or not. It was certainly devised in conjunction with the Olympics, but there was no certainty the Olympics would actually come. So it was a freestanding application, which had already been granted before the Olympics before the Olympics planning application was granted, and before the bid was won, a year before the bid was won. So again, that's a project which was not founded on the Olympics. It was worked in conjunction, but it's not the same thing. But nevertheless, they've now renamed it Stratford 2011 in order to give it the impression that it's part of the Olympics. And the ODA claims that if it hadn't been for the Olympics, this project wouldn't have happened. It's complete rubbish. So what you're seeing in Dalston as well is just simply a part of a much wider kind of, frankly, program of lying. It just doesn't add up. Places which are being used, which have perfectly sensible activities going on in them, they have people living in them, they have, in the case of the Olympic Park, you have businesses, you had housing estates, you had two traveller sites, you had sports facilities already in existence, like the Eastway cycle track. All of that has been swept away. We also had allotments. All of that's been swept away or removed elsewhere in order to make way for this park. And the area was described as a sort of wasteland. And that is what happens in an area like Dalston. It's sort of treated as though it's a sort of generally derelict area, which can therefore be gobbled up by developers and councils who come up with these grand schemes, instead of thinking about them in terms of the existing amenities, the existing facilities, and building around them. The case in point with the Dalston Theatre, or the housing which was there, which could have been refurbished, put back to good use, and left the area with character instead of being turned into a kind of brick and glass wilderness. Well, I think it's now turned into a wilderness, whereas before it had some interest. And I think much the same could be said, is what's happening with the Olympics, is that they are going to create another brick and glass wilderness, which in an area which actually had lots of character in it, and which could have been developed sensibly around existing facilities without the kind of destruction which has gone on, with at almost minimal cost. And finally, just the last sort of thing about the Olympics is, they're claiming they're going to create the largest new park in Europe. I think it is for 150 years. Well, originally it was going to be 129 hectares. The park is now down to 100 hectares, so they lost 29 of their new hectares. The original open space in the area, that is, open space which was both accessible and inaccessible, according to their own criteria, was 94 hectares. So at the moment, they're claiming to create a park of an extra 6 hectares. Now, by the time we get to 2013, we've already lost 29 hectares in the last, 4 years. We've got another 4 years to go. The chances are that the park will actually be smaller than the original area which was available before any of this started.